name and birth date, young lady.
Lashonda, December 1st, 1970.
Virgin Mary herself.
I know.
300 milligrams and 123 mils.
Come with me for a drive around my childhood neighborhood. Relationships between mothers and daughters tend to be a bit more precarious than the average relationship. Consider Lady Bird, Everything Everywhere All at Once, even Ginny and Georgia. These tensions are often caused by a fundamental inability to see one another. It is difficult for a mother to see her child outside of her own hopes and desires, and it's difficult for a child to view her mother outside of her own desires for support. How do we shed the idolatry inherent in a parent-child relationship, the loneliness of those hopes and expectations, and try to see one another for who we really are? My piece is a concerted effort to do that for my mother. Presented as a film, Tending My Garden challenges the conceptualization of motherhood, especially of Black motherhood. It primarily documents my mother, who is battling stage 4 cancer and navigating her own relationship with caregiving and receiving care. Who are Black mothers outside of the labels we want them to subscribe to? In what ways does caretaking take away from people, from relationships? My piece intends to capture the essence of my mother and to push viewers to think more expansively about nurturing. Shooting this film was an incredibly arduous process. There were several points at which I considered dropping my honors, as it was simply too much. I shot the film in 3 weeks during winter break, and I edited the film and audio over several months. The editing took so much time because of the incredibly sensitive content covered in my piece. However, I ultimately knew that now was the time to make this film. I got the inspiration for my film when I first learned about my mother's cancer diagnosis during my freshman year of college. I remember crying on the phone with my mother on a balcony near my dorm about how the reality of my mother would always be so much better than any memory I might have. I realized at that moment that keeping my mother alive was about remembering her as more than just my mother. It was about remembering her as the full person she is, good, bad, and all. With her having stage 4 colon cancer, there's a lot of uncertainty. Would she be well enough to interview? Would she be well enough to even spend time with me? Would she be well enough point blank? As much as I want her to be alive until I'm gone, that expectation feels less realistic. Because of that, I knew I had to make this piece as soon as I had the capacity to confront the less desirable realities of my situation. My desire to truly know my mother reminded me of a small production I had seen with her in my senior year of high school called Infamous Mothers by Sagacious Livingston. Her 6-person dramatic play tells the stories of several mothers who are considered infamous, as they are not perfect in their motherhoods and are on their own respective paths towards healing. These mothers struggled with addiction, abuse, housing insecurity, and general societal stigmatization. However, these mothers are presented as more than people who deserve compassion. These mothers are united and uplifted in unconditional love. I remember my mother and I sobbing as the play came to a close, as we were reminded of our own humanity. The fact that these mothers were still valued as mothers, despite being labeled by the world as selfish, wretched, and evil amongst other things, was a pivotal message in my life. We hold mothers to impossible standards of selflessness and condemn those who deviate from those standards in any way. However, it is a patriarchal ideal to only uplift the mothers who give all of themselves and their personhood for others. The stories of mothers who are self-full and who make mistakes also deserve to be uplifted. This piece posits itself in a larger context of the politicization of Black motherhood, as articulated in Black feminist theory. In her article, Visible Black Motherhood is a Revolution, Danielle Fuentes Morgan discusses her own anecdotes of motherhood and the ways the Black mother is forcibly put in opposition to the Madonna. The Black mother is described as being disparaged and abject, while the Madonna is prized and elevated. Still, the Madonna is an unrealistic expectation for mothers, and the admiration of Madonna is never afforded to Black mothers. This leads to a sort of goddess syndrome, wherein one feels alone in upholding unrealistic expectations. In her article, Morgan also discusses the power of making Black motherhood visible and showing it for all the nuances that it has, as it affirms the personhood of Black people. By learning and telling the story of my mother, I might be able to affirm the worthiness of other Black mothers who deserve to have their stories told. I knew that to tell this story, I needed to be incredibly intentional about listening to my mother's story. As a trained qualitative researcher through past projects and a product design major, I felt incredibly well equipped to take this leap. Through this piece, I found a way to combine video storytelling with tenets of product design. A key tenet of product design is need finding. In order to do this, you have to ask people questions in environments where they feel the most comfortable to give an authentic answer. To do this, I shot and conducted interviews in my mother's home, where she would be the most comfortable. I knew the her we saw there would be the most real my mother could get.
My name is LaShonda Prescott. I was born and raised in Oakland, but my parents were Mississippi, so I'm a kind of half generation into Oakland. I'm a little bit of country, I'm a little bit of hood, I'm a little bit of hippie. You know, I was blessed that we had parents that taught us at home and they thought that we could do and be anything, but along the way, they got kind of caught up in their lives and they kind of dropped the ball a little bit. They instilled in us that we were smart, that we were people. We always had books in our house. We always read. My dad, he is crazy, funny, so smart, the smartest man. My mama, she sold, and a lot of stuff we didn't appreciate. We wanted to be more cityfied. I've always had a relationship with God that was my own. Even when we didn't have to go to church, I always wanted to do Bible studies, and I would walk and I would talk to God, and I always felt like I had a connection to something bigger than me. A lot of trauma around, you know, just, the violence in our house. Went to Cal, loved to learn, enjoyed the experience there, hate testing. I think that anybody can teach you. I think genius is everywhere, and you can learn from anybody if you're open to it. And kids give you a chance to learn again. And that's probably for me one of the best things about motherhood, because it's an opportunity to learn again. And, sometimes I tell people to go back to their childhood, because who we are before people told us who we weren't, is who we really are.
In good need finding, one must also make sure to prioritize truth. There were several points of frustration I had during filming. My mother would start talking about her job or unrelated family drama. But rather than sit there and try to get the answer I wanted, I worked to identify trends within the story she decided to tell. How do her stories about her job tell us who she is? How do the things that matter to her inform how she views the world? Although it extended my editing process, getting free-form answers from my mother allowed me to capture her at her core. I worked hard to capture my mother in a way that encouraged empathy. Empathy is the first step in design thinking and a tenet of documentary filmmaking, so I gathered B-roll with this in mind. B-roll are videos of scenery to help viewers gather a lay of the land. This includes shots of locations, of non-specific background characters, or items with significance. All these shots come together to add a certain fullness to a piece, reminders of the completeness of a person's life. For my piece, I gathered intentional shots of my mother's home and the objects that remind me of her. Using the product design tenet of ideating, I created a fantastical scene to better communicate my own experiences with the subject matter. Using fantastical scene creation in documentary work seems inherently antithetical, but I create what I like to call fantastical documents to capture the spiritual and metaphorical nature of stories instead of relying solely on intentional editing. Using fantastical scenes allows me to showcase themes that might otherwise be hard to gather through non-metaphorical natures, which is directly related to design's emphasis on visualizing. Oftentimes, showcasing ideas in different ways allows you to more accurately get to the root of potential hopes and problems. It is my own form of ideating, of creating variations of the world around us that reflect what I want to see, what I see inside myself, or what I expressly hope never to see. For example, in this scene, you see my mother dressed as the Virgin Mary while receiving her chemo. The blue tint suggests the tragedy of the situation. There is an inherent isolation in idolizing motherhood. She is silenced intentionally, her words drowned out by the sounds of the chemo machine. Although my mother's stories, which are included in the film, illustrate this isolation, there is something about communicating it in an intentional scene that truly drives home the point. I conclude my piece with intense inspiration from Bell Hooks' All About Love. Through her, I know love to be an action and a choice, to willfully commit to seeing someone for who they are and wanting the best for them. Love lasts forever. For most of my childhood, which Hooks touches on, I depended on my mother for love and care and advocacy. As a recent adult, I am just unlearning this dependency and being able to love my mother in a way that encourages her spiritual growth as well as my own. I hope to show my mother as she is in my film, and thus as I love her. This piece is not just a creative exercise, not just a scientific one, but an exercise in human connection. My piece is enabling me to see my mother in a way either discipline would not really let me do, and to honor her as a living, flawed, resilient being. To see her not just as my mother, not just as my subject, but as a person that I am honored to know. This piece is not for widespread consumption. I do not aim to over-explain in order to make this piece something that everyone can understand. Instead, through the specificity of my story, I intend to speak first to my family and then to other Black mothers and daughters, and trust that my experience will mean something to them.